So good afternoon, I'm Catherine Renshaw, Labor's candidate for the federal seat of North Sydney. And I'm here with my friend and colleague, Professor Luke Beck from Monash University. And we're going to have a chat about the issue that's been all over the news today and yesterday, and probably will be up until the weekend, which is the religious discrimination bill that the government's introduced. So there's a lot of confusion and a lot of sound and noise about it. And I've asked Luke to just unpack it for us. So he's promised to do that in a not too academic way, even though he is the recognised expert in this area. So Luke, to start with, what is the religious discrimination bill and why was it thought necessary to introduce it?
Yeah, so the backstory to this goes all the way back to the marriage equality vote all those years ago. So you might remember there were some religious groups who were really upset about that, right? And some conservative backbenchers in the Liberal Party who were really upset about that. And so they were offered effectively a consolation prize in the form of a religious freedom inquiry. And that inquiry came back and said, actually, Australia doesn't have a religious freedom problem, which didn't really satisfy them, right? So the inquiry did say that, you know, there's a gap in federal discrimination laws. We have a race, sex, age, disability discrimination act, but no religious discrimination act. So let's have a religious discrimination act. But a regular discrimination act operates as a shield to protect people against being discriminated against. And at the state and territory level, in every state and territory except for New South Wales and South Australia, we already have laws banning religious discrimination. But a shield doesn't really satisfy the concerns of those people who are really upset about marriage equality. What they wanted effectively was swords, permission to discriminate against other people, in particular gay and trans people, but also people from minority faiths, women, people with disabilities in some cases. And so the religious discrimination bill is trying to do two things. It's got the shield provisions that protect people against being discriminated against on the basis of their faith or lack of faith. And those provisions are not controversial. Everyone's fine with that. It's the second part of the bill that has all these provisions that are the license to discriminate against others that have been super controversial. And there's a few key ones that have been sort of the focus of the sort of public discussion and debate. And one of them is the so-called statements of belief provision.
Right, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and so this is a provision that says that if you believe in something for religious reasons, you can say it, even if that breaches existing anti-discrimination laws. So in some cases, making sexist, racist, homophobic remarks can amount to discrimination. But if this bill passes in its current form, and we don't know whether it will pass at all or in what form it will if it does, if the bill passes in its current form, those kinds of statements will be allowed and they'll be immune from legal consequences.
So have I got that straight, that people can't do that right now, but if the bill is passed, then they would have this new right to hurt, discriminate, offend people on grounds that are now prohibited?
Yeah, so that's the express purpose of these provisions, to wind back and to override existing anti-discrimination protections. And so the Australian Human Rights Commission gave some real life examples of comments that are banned today and that would be allowed if this bill passes in its current form. And one of the examples they gave was a business telling a single woman that single mothers aren't welcome here. So that's discrimination today. Another example they gave was another business telling a gay man that gays aren't welcome here. So those kinds of comments can amount to discrimination today, and you would have avenues for redress through discrimination law, but would not be those kinds of statements would be allowed if this bill passes. So that's why it's really controversial. So that's why that provision is really controversial.
Okay, and so that's one whole area of problem with the current bill. And you mentioned that there was another serious area of contention as well. What's that?
Yeah, there's two others. And so one of those other ones is the so-called what they're calling the preferencing provisions, which is a bit of a euphemism. So some conservative religious groups like to say, oh no, we're not discriminating against people, we're just preferencing people. So there's these preferencing provisions, or discrimination provisions, if you like, allow religious hospitals, nursing homes, etc., to hire and fire and discriminate against their staff on the basis of religion. So for example, if you're a Hindu nurse working at a private hospital, you could lose your job just because you're Hindu. That would be valid if this bill passes. Okay. And when they say, and then it could even go further and say, well, we'll get rid of you if you say things like, you can be Christian and gay at the same time. That you would be allowed to sack somebody on that basis, because that's expressing a religious view that, you know, homosexuality and Christianity aren't incompatible, that some versions of Christianity say is not true. So those preferencing or discrimination provisions say that people in private nursing homes, private hospitals, etc., can be discriminated against if there's a religious motivation for it.
Again, is that currently prohibited, but the bill would enable that?
Yeah, so in some circumstances, private religious organizations can hire and fire based on religion. So there's obvious examples. If you're hiring a priest, obviously same religion. But if you're in some states at the moment, if you're hiring and firing, you know, a nurse or hiring and firing a maths teacher, you can't discriminate on the basis of race. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion. You can't discriminate on the basis of sexuality, etc. But this bill will change that mix. It overrides existing state and federal laws. And so there's controversy about how far private religious organizations should be allowed to discriminate on that basis of religious motivation. Should it be only for those positions where religion is a key part of the job? For example, you know, if you're the chaplain, you know, versus if you're just the cleaner or the nurse. So there's a lot of debate about that. And leaders of minority faith groups, the Buddhist Council and the Hindu Council, have come out publicly in the past couple of days and said, hang on a minute, we have concerns about this, because it's not just gay people who will be victims of discrimination. It's not just women who will be victims of discrimination. It'll be us as well. It'll be people from minority faiths who will be discriminated against. And so there's a lot of controversy there.
What about the third big area of problems that you referred to at the beginning?
The third area is this question of protection for kids at school. So in some states today, it is unlawful to discriminate against a kid at school just because they're gay or trans. But under this bill, under the version of the bill that Morrison wanted to put through, he wanted to change the law to say religious schools can discriminate against gay kids as long as they don't expel them, which means you can suspend them, you can punish them, you can put them on detention, you can ban them from school camp, you can ban them from extracurricular activities, as long as you don't expel them. And in the case of trans kids, you can even kick them out. And the rationale for that is that allowing that is to maintain the ethos of the school, seemingly because having a gay kid or a trans kid in the schoolyard is a danger or a risk to the community. And as we saw a couple of weeks ago with the City Point College in Brisbane, Christian families don't necessarily agree with that. There was a big backlash to that school's proposal, and the school was forced to back down and even ousted the principal. That principal is now off on extended leave. So I don't know that, you know, ordinary Christians support, you know, being mean to gay and trans kids. But Morrison didn't get his way. Last night, or actually very, very early this morning, the independent MP, Rebecca Sharkey, moved amendments to ban private schools, religious schools, discriminating against gay and trans kids at all in any circumstances, and teaming up with Labor and 5 Liberal MPs who crossed the floor to vote against Scott Morrison, that passed.
So I think one of our MP here, Trent Zimmerman, was one of those, I think, that crossed the floor, which was great to see. So what's the relevance of the Sex Discrimination Act? Why has that come up as an issue of it interacting with this bill that's before the House?
Yeah, that's this gay and trans kid stuff.
Right.
So that's allowed under the Sex Discrimination Act at the moment, although it's banned in some states under state law. Rebecca Sharkey's amendment amends the Sex Discrimination Act as part of this package of bills they're trying to get through with the Religious Discrimination Act to ban religious schools discriminating against gay and trans kids. Now, that's not what Scott Morrison wanted. Scott Morrison voted against that. He wanted to allow religious schools to discriminate against gay and trans kids. And so now it goes to the Senate. And this morning, groups like the Australian Christian Lobby have come out and said, well, hey, actually, the right to discriminate against gay kids was a key thing we wanted. you should just drop the bill at all. We don't want any religious discrimination bill if we can't discriminate against gay kids. And as of midday today, the government hasn't even started debating the bill. They don't know what they want to do now, because some of their sort of political backers are telling them, actually, no, this isn't what we want. So, will the government bring on the debate at all? Will they just let the bill lapse, drop, pretend it never happened? Will they try to amend it, put in Scott Morrison's preferred version? And if they try that, will that pass? Will Labor and the crossbench senators support that? Probably not. They've already said what they want. They want protection for all gay kids and trans kids at school. And if it passes in a different version, it goes back to the House to be passed again, which it may not, because the House might insist on the version it's already passed, which means that there's only a couple of sitting days left, so there may be no time to pass the bill before the election.
There was a wave of unpleasant response to the marriage equality vote when it occurred. There was a sense that this was an unnecessary thing to generate the sort of public angst that was affecting young people who were facing these issues and things. Is your sense that there's that same response to the way this has been handled now?
Yeah, because the big debate for the past 2 days is how far should be allowed to be mean and nasty to gay and especially to trans kids. If you're a 14-year-old gay kid or a 14-year-old trans kid, what must that feel like for your prime minister and your political leaders to be saying, actually, we think organizations, powerful organizations who are meant to protect you and care for you, should be allowed to discriminate against you? That must have an effect. That can't be fun. That's not treating all Australians with equal dignity and respect. And of course, not all religious groups support this. The big religious groups and the small religious groups have a variety of views. So the two biggest religious groups in Australia are the Catholics and the Anglicans, and they're both internally divided over this.
Yeah.
So Catholic bishops, for example, support the bill. They support these rights to discriminate. But Catholic welfare organisations like Sacred Heart Mission and like the St Vincent de Paul Society, that's Vinnie's, they're opposed to this. They don't support that kind of thing. And similarly, in the Anglican Church, the Sydney Anglican Diocese, which is traditionally really quite conservative, supports the bill. But the broader Anglican Church, through the National Public Affairs Commission of the Anglican Church, opposes the bill. And as I said before, some of the smaller faith groups like the Hindus and the Buddhists are opposed to the bill as well. So there's a lack of consensus among religious groups about whether these kinds of things are even needed or whether they're a good idea. And then there's the enormous division within the government. So you've got the Conservatives pushing for these strong rights to discriminate, but then the 5 rebel Liberal MPs saying, hey, no, this isn't very good at all. So Scott Morrison lost a really key debate in the House because some of his own MPs chose to vote against him.
Yeah.
What will he do in the Senate? We don't know. But there is a lot of division about this. And, that means it's not clear where this will land.
That was incredibly illuminating, Luke. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. My own experience as a mother of 3 children who've all been through Catholic schools is that when the issue comes up in practice, in schools, in the coalface, the response of the school is to just pile on the love and acceptance, and it becomes a really positive experience for everybody concerned. So you have to think that if a school wants to preserve this power, which you described as the power to be mean, then it shouldn't have that legal right at all. And the other schools don't want it anyway. So
yeah, I think most teachers in Catholic and other Christian schools are the kinds of Christians who love thy neighbour rather than be mean to thy neighbour.
I agree. And on that positive note, we'll leave this conversation and really appreciate your time and your expertise in sharing this with us. And we'll watch this space in the Senate over the next couple of days. Thanks, Luke.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.